Thank you, everybody. I'm going to be talking some in English and some in Spanish. I have a request that I should speak a little bit in Spanish. So the agenda says protein banks. We'll be talking about protein banks, but up here it will project as agro-sylvopastoral or sylvopastoral system. It's the same thing. I just want to focus it more towards a practical approach rather than just talking about a protein bank, of how we can implement protein banks. And I would like the young farmers of the future here to pay keen attention of what we can do and what we know works. If anybody has any questions throughout the talk, just go ahead and raise your hand and we address the questions then rather than waiting to the end. Okay? All right. So what is sylvopastoral? Sylvopastoral is the word sylvo means trees. Pastoral means grazing. So that's all that means. It's nothing complicated. It's trees within a farm. And how we arrange the trees and what type of trees we have is what we're going to be discussing that work for us. Now, all Belizean farmers who are throughout the country recognizes a number of edible trees that we have for our cows, sheep and goats. Not too much for horses, but for cows for sure. Everybody in rural Belize recognizes Ramon, or what we call Pichoy, which is bay cedar, or Madre Cacao, which is one of the glidicidias. We have all of these trees, or Lucina. We all know this, but very few of us actually implement them. So that's what we're going to be talking about what are the advantages. I won't get into the details, into the technical aspect, but more of the concept. If you want the details and the technicalities, we can discuss that. What I want to present today is a different approach to growing cattle under the theme, which is regenerative agriculture. In other words, a cow's diet or an animal's diet doesn't just have to be grass. So if I ask a farmer, here's a farmer from Costa Rica, and how many acres does he have? Let's say he says he has 10 acres. So he has 10 acres of grass. But really, he doesn't only have 10 acres. He has 10 acres on the surface, but he has limited space at the top. Sorry, unlimited space at the top and unlimited space on the bottom. And how do we utilize this? We call that vertical and horizontal farming, which is all part of a protein bank or of a sylvopastoral system. When we have an acre of grass, maybe we keep, for argument's sake, we keep one animal per acre of our grasses. But what if we had trees? Well, people say, oh, the shade has an effect. Those are technicalities that are easily workable. But when we have food at the bottom, where we walk, which is the grass, we can also have trees that are producing food. But not only food, although where focus is on food, for the animals, it could also be fruit that are edible to human beings. It could be timber plants. There's a number of things we can do. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Can everybody see the slides? Or is it too dim? It's too dim. Well, unfortunately, I cannot do any better, but we will work through this together. So what I'm showing here are the new grasses, the new panaceas. Everybody's talking about Mombasa. Everybody's talking about the elephant grasses. Everybody's talking about the star grasses, the African star grasses. And nobody's talking about what we already had. We already had a number of native species that, believe it or not, are as productive or even more productive than these new varieties. The only thing we have done with these new varieties, because they're the new thing, they're the new panacea, we're taking care of them. And the old grasses we had, they were just grass, they were just bush. We never paid attention to them. Nobody ever decided, oh, let's take some cuttings and do an analysis, do a digestibility of them, do some sort of management. So everybody now has these grasses. So the country has become a monocrop. In other words, Mombasa, let's everybody plant Mombasa. Or African star, let's everybody plant African star. And just as a side note, the dangers of this, we saw it last week and the week before. Everybody who is a cattle farmer, especially in the Cayo district, I'm not sure what happened in the other districts, but everybody in the Cayo district lost 100% of their grasses who had Mombasa. 100%. Before that, we didn't have any grass because it didn't rain. We had some beautiful rain and some gorgeous growth. And what came around? The army worm. And every single blade of Mombasa was eaten. The native grasses are still there. That's what the cows are eating right now. They're not eating the Mombasa. There's no star grass. That's the first thing that went. When they finished that, they went to the Mombasa and they ate that out. So that shows us, without being scientific, just by being good farmers by observation, that we have to have a diversity in our food source for our cows. It's like I cannot only eat rice, I'll get sick. Nor can I only eat beans. I have to have diversity in my diet. And that is also applied to animals. Well, these slides are not going to help us. That slide talks about the different possibilities that we have in trees and shrubs. So, in a protein bank, what we're trying to do is to increase the amount of nutrition that's available to the animals by planting trees or shrubs that the animals will eat. Now, there's many types. There are shrubs that, if we all know what a shrub is, that don't grow too tall. Then we have much taller trees, and then we have runners, vines that grow along the ground. For example, in this part of the country, we have a vine that's very popular. We all kill it because we think it's a weed. And yet, it's highly digestible and highly palatable. Animals love it. It's called desmodium. You might call it in Spanish mozote, or I think it's bribri. No, not bribri. It sticks on your pants, the seeds. How do we call it? Huh? A plant or a vine? A vine.
Sweetheart.
Sweetheart. It's a burr. It's one of the burrs. It belongs to a group of plants called desmodiums. And the ones we have around here is olifolium, Desmodium olifolium. But all of these are highly nutritious. And yet when we see them in the fields, the first thing we think about is 2,4-D, to spray it out. And these are valuable plants to our livestock, very valuable. And they don't take up any more space. A misconception, one of the biggest hindrances for animal farming, for animal husbandry in the tropics, is the amount of food, what we refer to as the biomass. If I would take and measure 1 square foot of land where it looks like it's full of grass, say a typical grass like Mombasa, which is a grass that grows straight up, which is one of the Panicum maximum grasses. There's many types of panicum. We have Mombasa, we have Tanzania, we have Aries. There's a number of varieties. If we would take that 1 foot by 1 foot, cut it out, and weigh it, everybody thinks because it looks beautiful and big that there's a lot of food there. But there isn't that much food. If you just take your hands and move it, you'd see how sparsely the stems are. So in between those grasses, other legumes that do not need as much sunlight could have been growing, so that we have full coverage of the soil. Because we don't want the sunlight, we don't want the sun rays to be hitting the soil directly. There's a number of reasons for that. But what we're looking for is to increase the amount of food per area. That is what is important. We want more food per area. So if I have a tree that has food up here, and I prune the tree appropriately, there's still enough sunlight coming into my pastures. Trees don't inhibit the growth of grasses, people. For too long, we think that they do. Now, if we have a forest, yes, I'm not talking about a forest. I'm talking about maybe 15 or 20 mature trees per acre. That's not a forest. We can design these things. A forest doesn't allow the light to come in. Then we won't have the amount of grasses that we need growing. But when we plant trees that produce a lot, for example, that are adaptable to this region of Belize, we have trees like Madre Cacao, which is Gliricidia. They're highly adaptable and highly palatable. And one of the most important things is that February, March, April, and May are so hot and so dry that our grasses are not growing anyway. There's no growth in our grasses. But our trees are still green. All our tropical trees are still green. So we can prune them. But not only are they green, they're providing something that we don't take into account, which is shade. Without shade, we are not profitable farmers. We cannot convert our grasses to meat or to milk if we do not have shade. Not because the animals don't speak to us and say, guess what, I'm hot, I need an umbrella. Though it means they don't have a splitting headache. It is not normal for animals to be in the direct sunlight. And it's traditional that we see throughout the bigger farms. We think, oh, that looks pretty. Rolling hills, cows on the hills, and no trees. Those cows are suffering. That's only for a postcard. Those cows are not producing throughout those months. It's too hot. Their reproduction, the temperature, is so high that the bulls are not fertile. Because the temperature of the scrotum is so high, all the sperm within them is dead. It's not active. The cows cannot cycle properly. It's a whole different dynamic. And then we wonder, the pastures are green, but the cows are skinny. So you call the vet in and everybody says, oh, they need vitamins. But why do they need vitamins? Now, protein banks, what do? They provide exactly what it says, protein. We have a number of options. Everybody knows all the local options. And then for years, the government of Belize, through the agricultural department, has promoted things like mulberry, which is very practical for us. Lucina, which grows like a weed, and we still don't have them. But do you ever wonder, if these things grow so well, why don't we see them in the pastures? Because that's the first thing the cows are eating. That's why they're not there, because they've eaten them. Because they want diversity in their diet. If you have a diverse diet, you have a healthy animal. And that's what we look for. So the protein banks, or the Sylvopastoral systems, at the end of the day, give us more income with the same amount of land. Because we have different layers of food throughout the year. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Is it really protein the issue, or a diversity of nutrients? I mean, they've latched on the word protein. It's a protein bank, but what you're really talking about is a lot of diversity of nutrition?
So the question is it really protein that the animals need, or a diversity of nutrients? And the answer is a diversity of nutrients, and protein is one of those nutrients. But for protein to form, you need other nutrients. The building blocks of proteins are, these high school children might know the word amino acids. So you need amino acids to form proteins. There are legumes that are very high in different amino acids, which help the formation of protein, which then builds, in the case of a cow, you have meat or milk or so forth. So what we need is nutrition. Protein is part of that. So, but it's a very specific type of nutrients. A lot of farmers prefer not to plant the trees and feed the cows with urea. There's something called a protein block, where you mix molasses and other additives, and you put some urea in it and you put it out there to feed. Now that you'd have to do that constantly through the dry season. Wouldn't it be easier to have trees planted in your paddocks, in your farm, that provide that protein? And there's multiple trees. For example, if you travel throughout the Orange Walk, the Corozal district, and the Cayo district, not as much in the two southern districts, have you ever looked under a Guanacaste tree during the period of the year when the Guanacaste has fruit? There's no fruit under the tree. Why? Because the cows have eaten it. Because it's high protein. It's not only because they've eaten it, they went under the tree, first of all, to seek for shade. And under that, they found the fallen pods which they consumed. These trees also, in the case of Guanacaste, are legumes. And what do legumes do? Legumes also produce a tremendous amount of nitrogen. So they're also fertilizing our areas. Under trees, the grasses are always greener. And it's not necessarily because they're shaded and there's water retention. It is also because the ground right around that canopy is also more fertile. because there's leaf drops. So when you have a protein tree, like a guanacaste, which is a very deep-rooted tree, what is it doing? It is taking the nutrients that are all the way down there, bringing it up to the surface through the leaves, and through the miracle of photosynthesis, transform them into different types of sugars and nutrients. When those leaves mature, they fall again, and the nutrients are now on the surface of the ground. Are the students following me? Yeah? You sure? No? Maybe? You've fallen asleep. So, what we're trying to do is to have, in very simple English, is to have different layers of food throughout the year. And some grasses are drought tolerant, but the majority are not. But most of our trees are drought tolerant. The concept behind protein banks, and why is it called a protein bank? And I'm not necessarily focusing on protein banks. Protein banks is when we fence off a piece of land and we plant in nice rows different crops where the animals will be allowed to go in to graze for an hour or two a day, once a week or so, and then taken out again. Things like mulberry, like nacedero, like, which other one do your cows eat in Spanish? Your cow? Madre cacao, pichoy, which is bay cedar, ramon. All of these crops we have, and they grow easily. We don't have to think about importing seeds. They're already here, and they're highly adaptable. And fascinating enough, there are some trees that the more they prune them, the more food they give. We have two very, very good examples. One is Madre cacao, and the other one is bay cedar. The more you prune it, the more it ratoons, the more it gives food. Now, some farmers argue that pruning is labor intensive. There is some labor entailed in pruning trees. But you don't have to prune your trees. The cows can prune it for you. It is a matter of management. Paddock sizes, the size of your fields is important. And those are the details. What I want you to understand is that when we have a unit area, we have an acre or 10 acres or 1,000 acres of land, what we have is different layers that we can be producing, and we're not utilizing it. So rather than having to clear more land because we need more grass, we need to plant different layers of food. And trees and runners and shrubs are the ideal situation for this, because it gives us the adaptability for our management on our farms. Now, those big industrial farmers as well, I can't drive my big John Deere through them anymore. I can't go around with them with my bush hog. You won't need that. You won't need that, because the cows are now being efficient at what they're doing. You know, there's no business of a bush hog in a cattle farm if it's well managed. There's no business. That's what the cows are there for. Cockspurs, you can integrate your goats and your sheep. They'll take care of that. There are certain weeds that are problematic, and there's hard work to eradicate them. But it can be done. It can be done. The cockspur, believe it or not, although it's a weed and it's terrible to have in our fields, is amongst the top 5 highest producers of nitrogen in our soils. It does have a purpose. Have you ever seen a cockspur that's not vigorously growing? Deep, deep green? Have you ever seen one that looks yellowish and palish? No. Because it's a very good nitrogen producer. Cockspur is a legume, and it produces. If you would like to integrate other species, maybe you would like to integrate goats or sheep into your farm, I can assure you the goats will eat the cockspur. Now, if you leave it to go into a tall plant, well, we've lost the battle. But that's management. That's management. Any questions, anybody? Everybody looks like I have lost you. Are we okay? Okay. So, the concept is, again, I'll repeat, is to increase the amount of food per unit area. By doing that, we can increase the amount of animals we have per unit area, or have more productive animals in that same unit area. Another important concept behind protein banks and the silvopastoral systems is that we all, for example, as cattle farmers, we like to see big cows. Big cows are not efficient in the tropics. Say a cow that's 1,000 pounds. How much does a 1,000-pound cow have to eat? Where what 1,000 cow will fit, we can have two 700-pound cows. And for my young students here, 2 times 7 is how much? 14. So we have 400 pounds more. Rather than having one big animal, we can have 2 smaller animals. And this is another concept that we need to adapt in the tropics. We're talking about regenerative agriculture. We're talking about climate resilience. We're talking about increasing soil fertility, increasing the productivity. We're talking about all of these new concepts. But there's systematic management that has to go with them. We cannot do the same thing or modify the farms in one. They don't work as a single unit. It's a whole unit. We need to modify everything, including the type of animals we have, the genetics we're looking for. It's very important to look at the whole picture. And as Mr. Bart pointed out, a protein bank might be a misleading terminology, because it's not only protein, it is nutrition that we're looking for. And we increase nutrition by increasing the amount of species, the different species within our fields. So trees and shrubs and runners and different types of grasses. Why does it have to be one type of grass? We get into these fads. I remember when Mombasa was introduced, it was everything had to be Mombasa. There was a time when before Mombasa was a grass that was called Brisanta. Well, even the farmers who were sheep farmers planted it. 6 months later, all the sheep started to die because it's toxic to sheep. It's toxic to pigs. It's toxic to human beings. It's also toxic to horses. Only cows can consume because they can digest the different toxins. They can digest some of the amino acids that are in them and some of the tannins that are in these grasses. So, are you following me so far? The important thing is diversity. We have a number of possibilities, and all the genetic material is already here. We don't have to recreate anything. So, if we have all of these tools, we need to start to use them. We need to start to increase our productivity. If we increase our productivity, our cost of operation falls and our profit margins become better and our lives become more comfortable. Farming is not meant to be hard work. It's meant to be enjoyable. You're meant to be able to walk through your pastures, sit under the tree and watch the cows graze. It's not that complicated, but we have complicated it. Because at the first instant of a weed, the first thing we run to is Roundup. And we've learned through trial and error and through some scientific research that Roundup is not a good choice for us. There's problems with Roundup. Farmers are very intelligent, but we take too long to change sometimes. I agree that we've been misled many times, and that's why we take long to change. But it's time now that we start to pay attention to what's happening. Belize has just gone through 3 difficult seasons. First, it did not rain. Then we had too much rain right after it, and right after the rain, we had too many insects. So it was one problem after the next. And it's only the small farmer, the small stakeholder, who survived that. All the rest had to go back to visit their bankers because they were all in trouble. The corn farmers lost their corn crop. As soon as they replanted, the rains came and flooded them out. And those who were not flooded out, the worms came and ate them out. And that was countrywide. And it will happen again. There's no reason why it won't happen again. So we need to become more resilient. And trees is what will create our resilience. And we have the trees here. We need to start to plant them. If anybody is interested in the designs of how to design these things, they're all online. And that's why I'm not focusing on that. What I'm focusing is on the concepts, on the theories, on the philosophy behind it. You go, Mr. Google has all the answers nowadays. All the answers. For those who are interested, there are organizations throughout Central America. There's one in Costa Rica, which is called CATIE, and they have many, many years of experience in protein banks, in agroforestry, in silvopastoral systems, and they also have a meeting in Belize, an office in Belize, where you can have access to them. There is also in Mexico, right across the border, there's INIFAP, INFAP, INIFAP, and they also have free services. I, for example, I've gone to Mexico and gotten a lot of plants from Mexico. So they have all of this technology available for us. So it's not difficult. Let's not think it's difficult. It's very, very easy. Now, in our farms, in our cattle farms, we should be integrating other smaller species that follow. We need to learn how to graze properly. Our sheep and our goats are going to be a very important part of the cattle farming industry moving forward. But we have to change our mindset towards trees and towards legumes. They are not weeds. Animals need shade. Without shade, they cannot graze, they cannot live happily. They will not be efficient in what they're eating. For an animal to be efficient, who knows how many pounds of grass do we need to make a gallon of milk or a pound of meat? I'll leave that to you to research. And you will see that we can be much more efficient, because grasses only have a certain depth in the root they can go, and our trees and our legumes can go much deeper. They can become more resistant to the high temperatures we're experiencing. We're also experiencing floods. Trees are also less prone to flooding, or they're more tolerant to waterlogging, most of our trees, especially in this region, than our grasses. Any questions so far? We're all okay. Who is a cattle farmer here? 1, 2. You're half of a farmer? You're kind of like... Any questions? Yes?
I was wondering the ratio cattle per land.
Okay. So, the acreage. How many animals should we have in an acre? 1. So normally what we consider an animal, from a technical point of view, 400 kilograms is one animal unit. It could be that it's 2 small animals that make 400 kilograms. So an animal unit is 400 kilograms. In the past, we say that it's 400 kilograms to an acre of land. And that is where you're trying to have a daily weight gain of anything from 1 kilogram to 1.2 kilogram per day. We now know that we can do much better than that. That is very easily achievable. In Belize, we have farmers that are well above that, because the animal's genetics and the proper implementation of good feeding practices through a very integrated farm using legumes, which are our proteins, and our trees, and all our so-called improved grasses and our native grasses, allow us to do better than that. So today, there's a lot of farms that are 1.5 to 2 animal units per acre in Belize. There's a number of farms. And all they did was increase the amount of shade in their farms and the water availability. That was also a big constraint, that our animals were walking 5 miles to water. Now we have smaller paddocks, more rotation. There's a system they call mop grazing, or rotational grazing. There's another system where we graze intensively, so that when the animal comes through, all the manure is left in that paddock today. Tomorrow it goes to another paddock. Most tropical grasses, not all, but most tropical grasses go through a 21-day cycle. At day 21 is when they're most nutritious. So if you can get them to eat it at day 21, that's ideal. So ideally, then your farm should have 21 paddocks. It is not always practical, but in an ideal situation, if an animal can move on a daily basis, every day it's getting the nutritional value of that tropical grass when it's the highest. Now, not all the grass also, then we start to look at details. Not the whole grass has the same nutrition. The tip to the stem have different nutritional values. They also have different digestible value, the digestibility of them. And that is where our legumes help in digestibility. Because inside the cow's stomach, which we call the rumen, there is what we refer to as the flora and the fauna, which is all the bacteria that are in there. And if they're eating a diverse diet, we have a breakdown of everything going on. So the absorption of the nutrients is much better. Because one thing is digestibility, and then the other one is the absorption rate. Not all plants are as digestible or as absorbed as others. And that is where we look at the details. There is another big fad right now, and I'm on that train, which is Moringa. Moringa is also a very good species to have in our farms. It bears when other plants don't have leaves. For example, in the dry season, Moringa is very good. It's also a very good life post. I mean, we're always cutting trees to make fence posts. Why are we not growing our own fence posts? Everybody used to do that before. But now everybody wants to see a dead straight fence with no trees. We have a young man here who is a very seasoned tour guide. We all know that birding is becoming a main part of tourism in Belize. Cattle farms, under these systems, under the creating protein banks and sylvopastoral systems, are ideal systems also to integrate into agrotourism, because the wildlife that these trees attract is very diverse. The amount of birds that live in open pasture lands where there's trees is incredible. We just held our bird conference, I think about a month ago in San Ignacio, and the amount of people who are spotting birds along the highways and in the cattle farms is more than in the forest now, because there's more food, they're more alive. But we need to be careful with all these agrochemicals that we're trying to use to control weeds, because those have adverse effects. Any questions? No. ¿Me sigue, doña? ¿Quiere en español? Lo que estamos hablando es que hay que incrementar la producción de la finca. Para incrementar la producción de la finca, no solo se puede hacer a base de pastos, no solo se puede usar el zacate, tenemos que usar otras especies, hay que usar árboles forrajeros. Pero un árbol en la finca no tiene que ser nomás para forraje de ganado, puede también ser un árbol frutal, puede ser un árbol maderero. Imagínese usted que usted tiene 20 acres y tiene 20 vacas, pero también adentro de esos 20 acres tiene unos 50 palos de caoba o de cedro o de laurel o cualquier palo que usted quiera sembrar. Ese valor de esos árboles es mucho más que el valor del ganado. Eso es cuando usted se quiere retirar, cuando ya no quiere hacer ganadera, puede ir a tumbar esos árboles si así guste, hacer bonitos muebles. Y eso no, el espacio que ocupa no reduce lo que le llaman la carga animal por acre. No vas a tener menos animales porque tienes árboles. Inclusive tienes más animales porque están en un ambiente que les gusta más, hay sombra. Si tienen los palos, por ejemplo, en Pachacán hay el ramón. Bueno, el ramón, todo mundo sabe que el ramón, el animal lo come, pero nadie lo siembra. El ramón también da una fruta que usted y yo podemos comer. ¿Y a dónde está en el mercado? No existe. Nadie lo siembra o nadie lo cosecha. Todo esto son palos que deberíamos de tener, toditos. En todas las carreteras en el norte hay un le llamamos monte que se llama lucina. Uno le llaman leucaena, en el norte le dicen lucina. Todos esos palos son de mucho valor, mucho más que estén comiendo solo zacate. Entonces, lo que queremos hacer es incrementar la cantidad de comida que hay en la finca. Si usted tiene un acre, o 10 acres, o 20 acres, no solo es acá abajo que lo tiene, hasta llegar a las nubes es de usted, nadie se puede meter ahí arriba. Todo esto es de usted. ¿Y por qué no lo tenemos sembrado con árboles a diferentes niveles para que haga comida en toda la finca? En el verano, en todo el país es lo mismo. En febrero, marzo, abril y mayo, las temperaturas son tan altas que nosotros en el río queremos estar. ¿Y usted cree que las vacas también no quieren estar ahí? Las tenemos pobrecitas ahí en el sol. Esos palos de ramón, de madre cacao, de pichoy, de guanacaste, hasta los palos de mango, los podíamos desmorrar para que ellos tengan forraje para comer. Esos palos, en el tiempo del verano, cuando no hay comida, es cuando ellos más valor tienen la comida, porque los zacates están secos. Si están parados, están secos, lo que son un peligro de un incendio. Y los del norte saben de incendios porque a cada rato hay fuego allá. Sí, entonces en el verano es cuando necesitamos los árboles. ¿Estamos? ¿Sí? También, ¿qué es lo que hacen los árboles que es muy importante? Las raíces van profundamente y de abajo traen todos los nutrientes para arriba. Entonces hay un ciclo de nutrientes. Uno no lo ve directamente, pero está ocurriendo. Los ranchos, las fincas que tienen árboles son más productivas. Hay leña, hay madera, hay comida, hay muchos otros productos. Mientras estás durmiendo, el árbol está creciendo. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Solo un comentario. Yo miro que hay personas que tienen finca allá por donde yo vivo. Ahí tienen matas de mango, de aguacate también, mismo adentro del rancho. Y en vez del animal comen esa fruta también. Y allá la fruta da mejor porque el animal sucia al lado y es fertilizante para los árboles también.
Sí, los frutales en los ranchos incrementa la productividad de tu rancho. Y las frutas son más grandes, no solo porque el ganado está reciclando los nutrientes, pero no hay tanta plaga, porque la fruta, la mosca no le da, el ganado no le da tiempo a la mosca que se reproduzca, porque el ganado se come la fruta. Esa es una forma de controlar las moscas.
Sí, estoy interesado mencionaba la diversidad de las pasturas. ¿Tiene algún ejemplo, alguna finca en Belice que está aplicando estas prácticas con pasturas más diversas, biodiversas, para saber un poco del manejo? Porque supongo que el manejo puede ser un poco complicado también, ¿no?
La pregunta es si hay alguna finca en Belice que tiene diversidad de pastos. La respuesta es sí, pero el manejo no es adecuado. Hay que tener mucho cuidado cuando uno tiene un potrero con diferentes pastos. ¿Por qué? Como usted, como yo, hay comidas que nos gustan más. Tal vez a ti te gusta más el pan y a mí más me gusta la tortilla de maíz. Entonces, si yo te pongo aquí en la mesa tortilla de maíz y el pan, te vas a comer el maíz, el pan antes del maíz. El ganado es igual. Entonces, si tenemos un potrero con muchas diferentes especies de zacate, es posible que el ganado se va a comer una y no se va a comer la otra. Entonces, la diversificación de los pastos hay que planificarlo. Y hay unos que son más palitables que otros. Pero hay soluciones. Puede haber diversificación dentro de la finca. Puedes tener aquí el potrero número 1 con un pasto, por ejemplo, estrella. Y a la par puedes tener otro con, por ejemplo, brisanta o mombasa, con el que guste. Entonces, tienes un pasto, en la finca hay diversificación de pastos, pero no dentro de los potreros. Si lo vas a hacer adentro de los potreros, sí hay que seleccionar. Para eso, los pastos nativos son mucho mejor. Los pastos nativos de la zona son mucho mejor para tener dentro del potrero para diversificación. The question was, how do we have diverse grasses or multiple species of grasses within the farm? And how do we apply that, or is there any models that work? And the answer is, there are farms that do it, but we don't do it well. My answer to him was, if there's, like everybody in here has a favorite food, cows are the same. There's cows that probably prefer a Mombasa to an African Star. So an area of the field will be overgrazed while the other will be left behind. And believe me, it's very difficult to force an animal to eat what it doesn't want to eat within the same field. There are ways of achieving that, and that is by having native pastures. There's a lot of native pastures that are as diverse or as similar in their palatability and in their growth rate. So growth rate and growth patterns are also important. There are grasses that grow upright. There are grasses that are runners. So all of these things we have to take into account. But we need diversity. Now, there are many, many models developed. And there are large-scale and small-scale farms that are working like this. A very easy way to begin is to have diversity within your farm, is to have smaller paddocks where you have a type A grass, type B in the second one, and so forth. So when you have rotational grazing, they're grazing different species. And that also helps tremendously in pest control. One pest, like the frog hopper, might not jump from pasture A to pasture B because they don't like what's in pasture B, but they like what's in pasture A. So when we have diversity in crops, so grasses, what we have done, we've made it into a monocrop, and we have to diversify our grasses. There's grasses today that we look at as weeds. I remember there was a time when the only grass we had was haragua, which was the Ipaepharema rufa. Everybody only had haragua. Now you can't even find it, except along the highways. We've disregarded it. And what's the grass right now that wasn't killed by the armyworm? Is that same grass. So we have to start to be keen farmers and observing. We have to be knowledgeable and start to really have details in our management. Any other question? The question is, through regenerative agricultural practices, is it possible to have a cattle ranch in most of the country? The answer is yes, but the management systems will be different. There's a concept or an idea that cattle is destructive. And yes, they are destructive if we allow them to be. But tractors are destructive also. A machete and an axe are just as destructive or more destructive. And we use the machete and the axe throughout the country. So the answer is yes, but our management practices are different. For example, as we all know, in the southern part of our country we have higher rainfalls. So higher rainfalls means we have different types of soils. The soils, although we have very diverse soils in Belize. We have areas that are very acidic and areas that are not, that are very deep alluvial soils in the south. So we would have to, if we're going to start a new farm and it's going to be dedicated to cattle, we'd have to do a plan. We just can't do it haphazardly. But yes, it can be done. And it's done. It's done throughout the country. Throughout the country, we have good examples of regeneration in the livestock industry. As a matter of fact, as much criticism as the livestock gets, it's one of the longest surviving industries throughout the world, because grasses are regenerative. Grasses pull down carbon, legumes pull down carbon, trees pull down carbon. But we cannot be discriminate about it. We can't have two bulldozers and a chain in between and knock down the forest and think it's okay, and then come with a plane and scatter the seed. That's no longer okay. I was a culprit of that also. But that's not the right way of doing things. I apologize that we couldn't project our nicely. A lot of time went into making some nice slides. I'm sorry, but the light doesn't help us. Thank you for your attention. If you don't have any more questions, all I want to recap is a protein bank includes trees, lots of trees, legumes, different types of grasses. A lot of us believe that a cow should only eat grass, and that is not so. A cow has to have a diverse diet. There's a lot of talk about nitrogen fixing trees, and there's very little talk about nitrogen bacteria fixing in grasses. And grasses also fix nitrogen throughout the tropics. Throughout the tropics, we have bacteria in our soils that fix nitrogen. There's very little talk about that, but there's a lot of research out there. But we all think that it's only legumes that do it. It's not only legumes. There's also bacteria. Legumes are fixation of nitrogen happens differently, but we also have tropical grasses that fix nitrogen. And the occasional thunderstorms help us with the nitrogen too. Well, thank you, everybody. If there's no more questions.